Maasai herdsman who came and sold his cattle in Dagoretti market, but he cannot move with that money to bank in a bank because the bank manager is asking either he wants to see the cows or he wants to see a photograph of the cows or the buyer of the cows. And in Dagoretti, Mr. Speaker, we buy cattle and we slaughter them there, process and pack meat, and you enjoy the meat here. Therefore, we cannot be asking our herdsmen, our good pastoralists, brothers and sisters, to explain every other coin they get from selling their cattle. 1 million shillings, Honorable Speaker, today, are about 10 or 11 bulls. Sometimes 5 if they are of good weight. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, these are issues that touch on our role as a House. They touch on issues that touch on the lives of our people. And I would really want to beseech you, Honorable Speaker, to make a considered ruling that will bring back not just our role as legislators, but also our role to oversight the institutions that are making these regulations, and also to represent our people in terms of what laws, what subsidiary legislation through regulations or orders governs our people, Honorable Speaker. And with that, Honorable Speaker, I beg to ask you that if and when you make your considered ruling, that you do restore that role of Parliament in line with Article 94, 1 and 5 of our Constitution. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Robert Mbui and Honorable Wangari, then close there.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker, for the opportunity.
And take 3 minutes each.
I'll also join my colleagues in confirming that the wisdom of this House in forming the Delegated Legislation Committee was to ensure that all statutory instruments, in other words, subsidiary legislation, is brought for approval in this House. And Mr. Speaker, in the Statutory Instruments Act, Section 11 deals with the laying of statutory instruments on the floor of the House, on the table of the House. And therefore, Section 11 says that the authority that it makes a statutory instrument must lay it within 7 days. Again, Section 11, Part 4 says that if they fail to do so, then that legislation ceases to have effect. Mr. Speaker, the problem that is there is that you need to define, to understand the definition of a statutory instrument. Mr. Speaker, some of these statutory instruments are actually pronouncements that have effect of law. How do you lay a pronouncement on the table of the House? And Mr. Speaker, you'll be surprised to note that even the education system that we are talking about reforming, the CBC education system was never brought to the floor of this House. And there are so many regulations that are also affected. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that you give the House and the Delegated Legislation Committee authority to pick any legislation that they hear that is out there, because we are out there representing people. If we get any legislation that is being made out there, we bring it to the floor, we address it as a committee, and we table it on the floor of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Gilgil.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise just from where Honorable Mbui has stopped, because I sat in that committee in 12th Parliament, and I think the Committee on Delegated Legislation has a lot of power that they can actually exercise. Any legislation or regulations that have come before the committee and have not been tabled officially, Mr. Speaker, they should actually annul them immediately, Mr. Speaker. Let them go back to the drawing board, the regulation makers, Mr. Speaker, and submit the regulations again, Mr. Speaker. That way, and I saw it happening in last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, we will exercise and be able to stamp back the authority of this House, because we are protected by the law under Section 11, and we are also protected by the Constitution under Article 125. If you feel that any issue out there is being abused, this committee, Mr. Speaker, can be able to actually bring back the dignity of this House, annul the regulations, bring the report on this floor, let the regulation makers go back to the drawing board and resubmit the regulations, Mr. Speaker. That way, the committee will assert themselves right from the start, because the mischief that we saw, Mr. Speaker, is that they wait for the time to almost lapse, and they bring with an idea that it can just self-operate and be able to run without going through the committee. So I hope that the ruling will also guide the committee to actually endorse and actually exercise their powers in annulling all the regulations, let us go back to the drawing board, Mr. Speaker. That way, the role of Parliament will be protected and we'll be able to assert ourselves in that